Minister, I want to ask you, please, about the addition of the 2 gigawatts of gas-fired power, which will affect Ireland's carbon emissions and reduction targets, and if the policy is driven by the needs of energy-intensive industries such as data centres, as suggested by the CEO of EirGrid in recent comments, and if you'll make a statement on the matter.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. The Government's policy statement on security of electricity supply sets out that the development of gas-fired generation is a national priority and that it should be permitted and supported in order to ensure security of electricity supply and support the growth of renewable electricity generation. The policy statement supports the need to deliver about 2 gigawatts of new gas-fired generation, which is set out in the National Development Plan and in the Climate Action Plan. The need for this level of new gas-fired generation capacity was identified by the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities, and this body has the statutory responsibility for security of electricity supply, but also by EirGrid, the electricity transmission system operator. As set out in EirGrid's Generation Capacity Statement 2021 to 2030, much of this new capacity is needed to replace older, high-emitting power stations, such as those fuelled by oil and coal, which are due to close over the coming years. It's also needed to meet the growing demand from large energy users, such as data centres, and the electrification of the transport sector and of heating in our homes and businesses. It's important to note that the development of flexible gas-fired generation to provide security of supply and support high levels of renewable electricity generation. The new capacity will only run when needed, and therefore the level of associated emissions will be minimised. A number of actions are being taken to manage the impact of data centre growth on our electricity system and emission reduction targets. The Commission for the Regulation of Utilities has published a direction to EirGrid and ESB networks that requires each of the system operators to prioritise data centre connections based on location, the availability of on-site generation and flexibility in reducing demand when required. And in addition, the Climate Action Plan commits the Government to reviewing its strategy on data centres to ensure the growth of such users can only happen in alignment with our sectoral emission ceilings and renewable energy targets.
Argued that when you strip away all the rhetoric that the Green Party in government are presiding over the expansion of fossil fuels and our reliance of them in the state. And what you're doing here is tying us into another 30 years at least on the dependence of gas, and facilitating arguments that will be made by proponents of LNGs by deepening our reliance on gas. Gas is not a bridge to anything. It's a fossil fuel, and its expansion of its use and its infrastructure is a betrayal of the climate movement that the Green Party is supposed to represent and the pledges made by Minister Eamon Ryan in Glasgow. There's really nothing short-term about this. Building of gas stations will tie us in, as I said, for 30 years. And we know from recent statements from Mark Foley of EirGrid, it's very, very clear. I think you should watch over the meeting he had with the data industry, that this is to facilitate the growth and the proliferation of that industry. It makes a complete nonsense of the claim that somehow we can magically continue to have unlimited data centres and reduce our emissions and reach our targets.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The fossil fuels in Ireland are being reduced. What we're moving towards now is 80% of our energy to be generated, of our electricity to be generated through renewables by 2030. So that necessarily means a reduction in our fossil fuel use. Although we have more gas plants being built, and I'm sure you understand this point, an extra 2 gigawatts of gas plant doesn't mean that we're burning gas in those plants all the time. It means that we have the capacity, when we're in an emergency situation, to bring up that much gas, to be able to continue to supply electricity to those who need it around the country. So it is a capacity, there will be a capacity auction shortly to allow for these 2 gigawatts, and that's for people to have the ability to receive electricity through the form of gas over the next 10 years. It is not to allow it to be burned all the time. It is for use when absolutely needed. I agree, gas is not a transition fuel. That's not a policy of the Government, but it is a policy of the Government that LNG stations are not to be built pending the review into energy security. Thank you.
Well, I suppose the next question is why we have an energy security problem and why it is that we may have blackouts this winter, and already many have been reported around the country. And I think part of the answer to that is the dependency of the data industry on, at the moment, 11% of our national grid. Now, I know you and Eamon Ryan would argue that we have to rapidly move towards renewables and offshore wind energy, but why do we not have it yet? We don't have it yet because those who sat on licences for over 20 years and did not develop the offshore wind that they could have done, did so because of their profit margins, not because of the needs of the state or the needs of the national grid or the needs of the country. So you're attempting here to bulldoze in changes, the proliferation of gas, the recommitment to having gas infrastructure in the country. It's absolutely shameful for the Green Party to sit in government and do that. And if we want to deliver wind energy at scale, your party should be advocating a national renewable energy company like the ESB has done in the past to do that for us in the future with renewables, and not be reliant on the profit margins of the developers of renewable energy.
Why do we have a challenge in our energy? It's because we're having a major transition where we're moving away from fossil fuels, we're moving towards a low carbon economy, we're moving towards renewables, and obviously that's difficult to do. And I actually agree with you, Deputy Smith, that we should have put in offshore wind 10 years ago. When I look at other countries, I look at Germany and I look at Denmark and I look at the Netherlands and Belgium, and I see the great offshore wind farms that they've built, and I think that we should have done that too. It's, we've got a windy area around our country, but we can't go back in time. We're here now. We've been in government a year, and we're building offshore wind as fast as we possibly can. And your question about should we have a national body that's building renewable energy, I think there'll be huge involvement by the state. ESB has for a long time been building renewable energy. Bord na Móna, Coillte, all of those large state bodies are going to be massively involved, and of course EirGrid as well. Thank you.